Hi guys, thanks for checking out this video. I'm really excited to be making a video. It's been a while and I'm really excited about this one because I've been wanting to talk about this subject for a long time. Today I'm talking about FFC and why it matters for our board games. I was recently at my local Barnes & Nobles and I was really impressed by all of the board games that they have had. I hadn't been there for a while and they had opened up a whole section dedicated to board games only. And it was such a great snapshot of where our board gaming hobby is in pop culture because Barnes & Nobles are pretty much everywhere. And the first thing I noticed was that there were a lot of board games that didn't have shrink wrap on them, which was great. I was really happy to see. Most of these games were like party games or kind of like cheesy pop culture games, like TV show theme games. But then there were two publishers that consistently had no shrink wrap on their games, and that was Ravensburger and Funko. So I was really interested in what they were doing. And I started to look at the backs of their boxes to see if they were doing anything else in a sustainable manner, primarily looking for FFC logos on their boxes. Let's discuss FFC. Let's just lay it all out there. FFC stands for Forest Stewardship Council. It's a non-government affiliated group that sets standards for responsible logging practices in manufacturing. They make rules that help guard against deforestation, the loss of animal habitats and biodiversity, and they help protect local communities from harmful logging practices. For example, polluting creeks and streams is a common threat when forests are logged. So the FFC works globally as a third party to ensure the environment and people are protected. While FFC is not perfect or foolproof, it does allow for there to be some sort of regulation for responsible logging. The FFC logo is often found on wood and paper goods, and it allows for a consumer-driven regulation system rather than leaving industries to regulate themselves. In the grocery stores, we will often see the FFC logo on items like tissue paper, toilet paper, and paper towels. So it makes me really surprised when I go into a Barnes & Nobles and find hardly any FFC logos on books and board games. A lot of people assume that board games are made entirely from recycled materials, and this is not true. When it comes to box manufacturing for our board games, there is a high content of recycled materials in boxes, but not equally across the board when it comes to manufacturing. In the EU, using recycled materials is much, much higher, and the percentage is about 95% of the paper in games made in the EU are 95% recycled fibers. In countries like China, a lot of the manufacturing doesn't use as much recycled materials, and so it's much lower, like 30% or even lower. So when we're talking about using responsible papers and woods in our board gaming products, it matters a lot because if there isn't a lot of recycled papers in our board games, then we want to know where the rest of the paper goods are coming from. When I was looking for the FFC logo at the Barnes & Nobles, Ravensburger's games all were FFC mixed. And I wasn't that surprised because I knew that that was something that they were doing, but I was a little surprised that all their games are FFC. And just in case you're wondering if the FFC cost gets passed on to the consumer, the Ravensburger games were about $10 more than most of the Funko games. And I don't know if that is because it's FFC or if it's just because they don't have as much content or they're a different style of game. Funkoverse did have one game that was made with FFC mixed paper goods, and that was Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. And that game is $29.99. And a comparable game by the same publisher is Back to the Future, which is also $29.99 and is not FFC certified. Even if a game has an FFC logo on it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% sustainable, although it is a step in the right direction. There are a lot of other things to consider when it comes to the manufacturing of a game and the environmental impacts of the game. In fact, there was a group in France, the Union of Game Publishers, EJU. They created a report. They were looking at large, medium, and small board games and analyzing them to see what part of the game had the most environmental impacts. And what they concluded was that the majority of the impacts comes from the paper products, the cardboard, the punch boards, the cards, the rule books, etc. So their conclusion of this analysis was that the impact of the game is proportional to its size and weight and does not increase exponentially. Not surprisingly, the heavier and larger a game, its box and its components, the greater the impacts on the environment. The elements with the most impact are first the content, and then the box, and then the transportation appearing third in position. I think this is helpful to bear in mind for publishers and board game designers because it's a bit of a daunting task to make something sustainable, to make anything sustainable, and it's hard to know where to really focus in your efforts. This is also helpful for consumers to know what to ask for. Rather than saying, we want our games to be more environmentally friendly, we can now say what I want to see is an FFC logo on my board game, or a PEFC logo on my board game. Having this terminology is really helpful because it's specific, doable, and the most effective at reducing the negative impacts on our planet. I found these findings on a website called Gus & Co., and they were writing about ecological impacts of board games and were referencing this report. If you want to make a board game designed more sustainably, they first recommend to make the game as small as possible. And then secondly, to use responsibly sourced raw materials like the FFC certified wood for paper products. Definitely confirmation and validation on what I've already been learning from other people who work in sustainability and work in the board game industry. Now, these findings are really helpful for board game publishers to be aware of, but it is primarily focused on upstream manufacturing. When it comes downstream to the consumer, there's a lot of other things to consider, and I think that the impacts are different and greater when you're looking at the board game product in a different time and space. Once the game is produced and it's in the consumer's home, what becomes of all the plastic? What becomes of the shrink wrap? The way that these things are handled will determine the environmental impacts. So there's a lot of things not considered in this report, but I still think it's a super important report to be aware of if you're looking into making games more sustainable. In the Barnes & Nobles, there were only 3 different publishers that it was 4. It was 4 different publishers that actually found the FFC logo. It was Ravensburger primarily. Funko had that one game that they did FFC, and I really hope to see them do more. There was another game that was sustainable. I'll put a picture up. I forget the name of it. And then there was one about the Donner Party, a little box game that was also FFC. The point is that there's still a lot of room for growth. When you look at this entire section and think that there was only a handful of games that were actually made with responsibly sourced wood paper products, it is a little mind-boggling. But it's not just the board gaming industry. When you look around the entire Barnes & Nobles, it's very hard to find an FFC logo on any of the books in Barnes & Nobles. The paper industry as a whole must begin to prioritize the invaluable resources that are our forests. So I have a quote here from the Wood and Land Trust, and I'll put a link below so you can read the rest of it. But what they say is that the entire woodland ecosystem plays a huge role in locking up carbon, including the living wood, the roots, the leaves, the dead wood, surrounding soils, and its associated vegetation. When a forest is logged, yes, the wood is taken and used to make a new resource, but we don't always consider that the leaves, that the ecosystem, that the roots, all of those things are also destroyed for the sake of these raw resources. and we really need to start protecting all of it because it's one of our greatest weapons against climate change. I don't really know how publishers in the book industry would listen to someone like me, but I do know that the board game industry is very sensitive to what consumers want.
Let's not kid ourselves. The driving force behind all the production methods, processes, issues is the consumer. If the consumer values, let's say UV varnish, well, then publishers will ask for UV varnish from the factories. UV varnish is nothing but a layer of plastic on top of the printed sheet. So that's a polymer.
Yeah.
It's plastic. So if people like that, it's going to happen. If people want the bling from China, it will happen. The publisher will buy it.
In addition to manufacturers like Ravensburger and Ludofect, there's also Fabrikamart and now Panda Manufacturing are all FSC certified facilities. I'm really excited that Panda is now offering FFC and can provide the FFC logo on their boxes for consumers to see that they're investing in a responsibly made board game. A lot of what Panda does is Kickstarter projects. And Kickstarters are driven by consumers the most. Consumers, they can really have a big say now and say, we really want FFC, and now we have Panda Manufacturing who can provide it. When I think about my favorite games, the games that are on my top 10 or top 20, they are games that came out of Panda Manufacturing. So I'm really excited about the fact that they took the steps to become FSC certified. I'm really hoping some of my favorite publishers like Red Raven, Genius Games, Stonemaier Games will really pursue this sustainable option in their future board game productions. I have high hopes, and I hope that you're encouraged as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something from this video, please consider sharing it with a friend. And if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.